This video is about ethical issues with the use of non-human participants, and this is page 58 to 59 in your textbook. In today's video, we will discuss and analyse the use of animals in psychological research. This is a PY3 question and essay, and that will appear in the exam. Now, the question that has the potential of appearing in the exam is discuss the ethical issues in the use of non-human animals in research in psychology. Obviously, we know that the questions can have variations, but you will ultimately be looking at non-human animals in research and the ethical issues that might arise as a result. Now, this area requires a different approach to the other topics and we have considered so far in this term. We need to look at the ethical issues that arise when using animals in research, including the arguments for and against the use of animals in research. Obviously, we know that there is a plethora of reasons as to why we use animals in research. However, we need to ensure that we are addressing both in this essay. So it's very different to the human ethical issues essays. Now, within psychological research, ethical issues have arisen when using non-human animals, mainly in relation to protection from harm. So many studies have led to animals obviously having severe degrees of harm happen to them. For example, with Salyer's rats, as we know, most of his rats died as a result of his experiments. So the issue here is to discuss the harm that such research causes and to consider the arguments for and against the research that causes such harm. So the fact that the benefits outweigh the costs, does this mean that this research is more valid as a result? To use animals whenever possible in their studies, as such research could alleviate any kind of human suffering, because animal suffering is preferential to human suffering as a result. So therefore, obviously for us, the costs will not be outweighed because the benefits for humankind will be greater by using animals as a result. Whilst other psychologists have argued that it is ethically and morally wrong to abuse any animals simply because another species has got greater power, because humans have got the control and they can manipulate and obviously house other animals in specific ways, this doesn't make it right that we include them in our research. And they argue that this is a degree of speciesism, which is very similar to racism in some regards, that we claim that it's wrong for one species to be tested on, whilst another species it is okay, which is not obviously fair if we're looking at it. Whilst other researchers and psychologists take a third viewpoint and state that animal research should be undertaken, but that set guidelines should be followed so that they are beneficial, so that only beneficial research is carried out with strict controls over the amount of stress an animal can encounter, as well as the suffering that is caused, as well as the treatment of the animal within the research. So for example, you won't have a experiment like B.F. Skinner's happening where pigeons were starved and they were 1/3 of their original body weight. This would not be the kind of research that we'd want. We'd want research with strict guidelines that ensures that animals are treated fairly and well and that they are looked after in the research so that the costs on the animal do not outweigh the benefits for humankind to an extent. Now, the use of animals in research is still widely common, despite there being now stricter guidelines in place. However, the question still remains as to whether the science at any cost is justifiable. Now, you'll see on the video here that I've got a QR code that links you straight to the Peter video that we viewed in lesson. As well as that, if you look on the pupil area, there is the full video for using animals in research as well, which we also viewed in lesson. So obviously, if you want to remind yourself of them, feel free to obviously click the QR code or go to the pupil area. Now, like human research, we've got to consider the seesaw here of the cost-benefit analysis. So, do the benefits outweigh the costs? And if the costs outweigh the benefits, obviously, then we know that there is something ethically wrong going on there. So we need to consider this throughout the essay here. that actually using animals, does that make the costs rise, which therefore outdo the benefits in which can be applied to humans, which we'll consider further within the essay. Now, here's a brief essay outline for yourselves, which obviously have a quick mini introduction. Why should we use animals? The value of them. But is science at any cost justifiable? What are the existing constraints? And do these constraints work to reduce ethical costs? Obviously, if you use the other resources which I've given you, they do offer alternative ways in which you could structure this essay as well. It's very controversial and a highly emotive area, as many people feel animals are too often abused and cause unnecessary distress in research. However, some believe that the benefit of such research outweighs the ethical costs. Therefore, legislation has been established in order to continue with animal research, but also to protect them. So there has been a move to obviously ensure that this distress and stress which is caused to animals is started to be reduced, and it is not as substantial as it once was in the past, arguably. Now, the reasons why we use animals in research, it can be for intellectual curiosity, greater control, and then also, as well as that, the benefits outweigh the costs. So that cost-benefit analysis has been more settled in that case. So we'll be looking at the first section broken down into these three parts. Now, intellectual curiosity here. So some researchers see animals as fascinating in their own right. This therefore intrigues them and they want to investigate it further to see if their behaviours can be altered or if there can be any similarities which can be picked up. Have a think about in your core studies as an example which we've seen. Example which we've seen within our core studies would have been Gardner and Gardner with Washoe the chimp. They just wanted to demonstrate the language capabilities of primates. So therefore, it was more intellectual curiosity rather than a benefit for humanity by establishing that we could get a chimpanzee to use ASL. Objectivity over the test subjects, something which you just cannot have with humans, due to obviously you feeling a form of sympathy towards your test subjects if you were causing them distress or harm. As well as this, they are physiologically similar, so to some animals, and share some evolutionary characteristics which are very similar. So therefore, we can generalize the results to humans when we are testing on animals. We have all got the same drives to an extent due to those evolutionary processes in which we have undergone throughout the centuries. Now, arguably the cost here. Now, the cost of using animals is far less than using humans, therefore meaning there is a greater benefit to society by using these animals to test specific behaviours and establish what causes those behaviours and give us a greater understanding of humankind as a result. The example of this is Harlow's monkeys. Now, this is the link and the QR code to Harlow's monkeys here. Obviously, pause it here if you want to have a quick scan and watch the video yourself. Now, Harlow's monkeys obviously started to challenge the behaviourist theory of the learning theory. So they tried to show that that attachment wasn't about the need for food. It was more driven by comfort. So his research demonstrated that through the use of monkeys in research about human attachment really started to develop this field further. The use of monkeys enabled him to investigate behaviour in a way that could not have been done or carried out on human infants due to it being unethical. The negative side effects obviously we'll discuss in a second, but these monkeys were taken away from their mothers in complete isolation and then reared with a wire mesh monkey which gave it food, and then a monkey which was wrapped in cloth, which is the comfort. Now, we wouldn't be able to do that with an infant purely because it would be unethical and it would be awful to treat a human baby like that. But similarly, we should have this view with these monkeys in which Harlow used. What similarities are there between humans and animals? Now, one of the main arguments is that, like humans, animals are sentient beings. They have emotions and they can feel pain in very similar ways in which we do. So therefore, the Lisbon Treaty of 2009 officially classified all animals as sentient beings, supporting this idea, suggesting perhaps that they should not be used in research because they feel and they process information exactly the same way in which we do. However, we're going to continue this discussion now. That means if we consider brain damaged patients who are no longer sentient because they don't have the same processes of information as we normally do, we would not think for a minute to carry out experiments on them. So the idea that we use animals for research because they are not sentient is unfounded, because we have got other avenues in which we could pursue and test on, whilst now we are just using animals because they are easier and we can control them probably a lot more. An example of this is with Seligman's dogs here. Now, Seligman's dogs is all about learned helplessness. There's a QR there for you just to have a quick scan of. Now, for us, he shocked these dogs. He put them through a lot of pain, and he made them become more timid creatures as a result. Now, the fact that he's been doing this, and they were sentient creatures, they experience pain as what we do. So therefore, this is unethical that he conducted this type of research. So really, the sentient being argument here really needs to be taken into consideration, because ethically it's not being considered by researchers. Now, naturally, we would find this experiment shocking, because Seligman's use of dogs in learned helplessness experiments shocked people, which suggests that humans often consider animals to be sentient beings, because we can see that they process pain in a very similar way in which we do. So therefore, they shouldn't be used in such experiments like Seligman did in his experiments. Now, it's been argued that our use of animals in research is that of speciesism. We use animals because they are lesser than humans. Singer in 1975 likened this to racism or sexism, suggesting that we have no good reason not to extend the idea of equality to animals, because like we have done so with different ethnicities and genders within our society. We need to be treating them fairer, so that obviously they can have the same rights awarded to them and they're not be exposed to the same potential psychological, physical harm that psychological research can impose on an individual. Now, Gray 1991 believed that we have a special duty of care to humans, and therefore this cannot be compared to the likes of racism, because humans are different to animals, and we will treat other humans the same, whilst animals, they are different species, so therefore they need to be awarded their own separate rights. We cannot give them the same rights as what we give other human beings, because they are not, even though they are sentient beings, they are not exactly the same as us. Now, Regan in 1984, an absolutist on the topic, disagreed with the utilitarian opinion that if the benefit outweighs the cost, then research on animals is permissive. He believed under no circumstances should animals be experimented on, because they are sentient beings and should be treated as such as well. Now, the BPS has created several and been influential in the creation of several pieces of legislation. There are now several pieces of legislation in operation which place restrictions of using animals in research. Within the BPS guidelines, they contain advice on how to choose and care for these animals whilst experimenting on them. Now, in 2000, the Home Office issued further guidance on the operation of the 1986 Act. This introduced the guiding principle of the 3 R's, first proposed by Russell and Birch in 1959. Researchers should seek, wherever possible, to replace animals with suitable alternatives, e.g. brain scanning techniques, to reduce the number of animals used, and refine procedures so that they cause less suffering. A national group, the National Centre for Replacement, Refinement and Reduction of Animals, and the NC3Rs, has been set up to encourage research and support the use of these 3Rs as a result. So therefore, we can see that obviously legislation has been taken into account, and that they have started to influence the way in which psychological research is conducted. Arguably that is not completely solved the issues in which was happening with animals being used in research. Now, Dunayer argues that legislation simply sets standards for imprisonment, enslavement, hurting and killing of animals. So legal does not make it right. So we've really got to take this into account, even though legislation is not completely addressing the ethical issues of using animals in psychological research. Furthermore, the NC3Rs conducted analysis in non-human animal research and concluded that many were poorly designed without specifying a number of animals used, a potential neglect of the 3Rs as a result. So even from this research, there's still many ethical issues emerging as a result. Now, that is the end of the essay for us. Now, you've got to remember that this is an essay which you become very emotive and impassioned about, but try not to go over the word count. Remember, this is only a 15-mark essay, so try to stay within those boundaries.